Hello everybody, welcome back to American Textbook Reading Series. In this lesson, we're looking at Science Book 3 and we're on Unit 7. Wow, we're really making some progress. Unit 7 is about fossils. Fossils are cool, aren't they? Well, in this lesson, you will discover what can become a fossil and how fossils form. Okay, as usual, let's begin with the vocabulary. Our first vocabulary word or phrase is die out. Die, that's a sad word, right? It means something stops living. But when you talk about a whole group of things, like maybe a whole species or maybe many individuals in a large group, they all die at the same time. You can say to die out. Die out means to become less in number and finally stop existing. Do you know that more than 90% of all living species that lived on the earth have died out in history? Isn't that amazing? We are very lucky to be alive, but there are many, many animals that we've never seen before that lived on the earth a long, long time ago, and they all died out. But wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be fascinating to see some of these animals? All we can look at are their fossils. Okay, let's continue. Bury. Bury means to put something under the ground, right? If you dig a hole in the ground, you put something in the hole and you put earth on top of it. That means to bury. To bury. Sometimes things just get buried naturally too. Rot. Ugh. It's a smelly word, okay? When something rots, it becomes softer and slowly breaks down. Usually a dead thing will rot. Like in this case, we see a dead fish. A dead fish on the beach. The sun will hit it. The air, will make it change. It slowly breaks down. It smells terrible, right? But it slowly breaks down and breaks apart, and it becomes part of the soil. We covered that in a previous lesson. So rot means to become softer and slowly break down. It's not just animals, but also any fruit or vegetable. A lot of the food that you eat, you throw it away. Where does it go? If you throw it away on the land, it will rot and go back into the soil, and that's good for the soil. But a lot of food waste winds up in other places as well. Hopefully we can recycle it and use it to make better soil. But that's a different unit. Okay, rot. Remains. What is rotting? Well, the remains of an animal or a plant are rotting. The remains are the parts of something left after the rest has disappeared. So in this case, we can see what looks like a cow. The cow died in the field. It started to rot, and all the meat, all the flesh has rotted away. What remains? Some of the skin, the hide of a cow, and the bones. The bones are very tough and strong material, so they are the last to rot and go away. Print. A print is a mark left on a surface made by an object pressed into it. What does that mean? Well, think about a ground that's soft. It's like mud, right? And let's say I take my hand, right, and I push it into the mud and I let go. What do I see? I see an outline or a print of my hand. Right? So if I push the mud and let go, right, I make a mark in the mud. And that is a print. That's a hand print, right? But of course, many things that die in soft soil like mud or clay will leave a print. It will leave an outline of the shape. Interesting. Next, we have fossil. Now, the fossil is the hard print of an animal or plant found in a rock, right? We just learned print, right? And I told you if you push your hand into mud, right, and then let go, you have an outline of your hand. Now let's say that mud dries, right? And then another material fills your handprint, a softer material, right? And over a long time, and then then the print and all the material is buried under lots of rock, and there's lots of pressure, right? Well, that mud will turn into rock, but that mud still carries your handprint, right? So thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years later, maybe that mud turns into rock because a lot of material is on top of it. It gets buried and it turns into hard rock. And millions of years ago, millions of years later, maybe somebody moves the rock away and they see, oh, there's a handprint there. It could be your handprint. Amazing. Okay, so that's a fossil, right? It's the hard print of an animal or plant found in a rock that is formed over thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. Very interesting. Okay. Dinosaur. Now, like I said before, a lot of animals that lived on the earth have died out a long, long time ago. Dinosaurs lived on the earth 65 million years and earlier on the earth. There were many kinds of dinosaurs. Big dinosaurs, small dinosaurs, very ferocious, scary dinosaurs, and some small dinosaurs that were cute. And probably we thought, oh, that would make a good pet, but maybe not. But anyway, there are many species of dinosaurs living on the earth millions and millions of years ago, before 65 million years ago. And dinosaurs are a type of reptile. Reptile is like a lizard. In fact, dinosaur is Greek. In Greek, dinosaur means terrible lizard. So terrible lizard. Think about that. Of course, if you saw the picture, this looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Really tall, big teeth, sharp claws. Oh my gosh, yes, that is a terrible lizard. Okay, so dinosaur is a type of reptile lived millions of years ago. Okay, our last word or phrase is dry out. Dry out, to become very dry. It means all the water leaves something. Remember the example I just gave you? You put your hand in mud. Well, the mud is wet. There's a lot of water in the mud. That's why you can push your hand into the mud. But imagine you do that and then it doesn't rain for a long time, and that the sun's very hot, and the sun dries out all the mud. So all the water comes out of the mud, and the mud becomes hard. So that means to become dry. When there's no moisture, no rain, things will dry out. Okay, those are our words for the lesson today. Let's take a look at some of the main ideas of this lesson. The first main idea is, how do fossils form? Right? I kind of gave you an example with your handprint, but let's take a look at, what about animals that die, right? How do they become fossils? Let's take a look. So, okay, so the first thing, it comes in stages, right? First, second, third. What's first? What happens first? What happens second? What happens third? And so on, okay? So first, a living thing dies. It is buried under sand and mud. Next, second, its soft parts rot away and the hard parts remain. Third, the sand and mud that are around the bones, right, the hard parts, become rock, right? This is because a lot of pressure. Usually it's buried under, it's buried and the material that it's under builds up higher and higher and more weight, and that makes more pressure. And what does that do? The sand and the mud become rock because of all the really strong pressure. The print of the living thing left behind becomes a fossil, right? Because all that pressure, the sand and mud become rock, and rock is very hard, right? It lasts for a very, very long time. And then when, of course it's a fossil, but nobody can see it. But, after time, maybe there's some changes in the land, and rain and water might wash away the top, and then you can find the fossil in the ground. Of course, people also go digging for fossils. They go looking for fossils in nature. Actually, my dad, he was a geologist, right? Of course, he wasn't looking for fossils, but in many of the times when he goes out, he's looking for gold and silver and things like that. But when he goes out and he looks in nature, right, he can find some fossils. And that lets him know how old is the rock. Because we know when these animals lived, so we can say, oh, here's a fossil of a species that lived 20 million years ago. So this rock is 20 million years old. Interesting. Okay, so that's how fossils form. Next, we think about what can be fossils. Well, I told you your handprint could be a fossil. Isn't that cool? So if you go out and you make handprints in the mud, maybe that will become a fossil sometime. So have fun, but don't tell your mom I said so because she'll get mad at me, okay? But anyway, okay. Anyway, what can become fossils? Shells. Shells can become fossils, of course, because shells are very hard, right? And they're already in sand. They're at the beach, right? So if they get buried in sand, if the sand gets buried by a lot of other material, right, the sand might turn to rock. Shells can become fossils. And geologists have found many shells as fossils of very old life. Footprints, that's an interesting one, right? There are actually footprints of people who lived thousands and thousands of years ago in the rock, right? And you can see footprints of like two people walking together in a rocky area, and their footprints stayed behind. Isn't that amazing, right? So that's footprint or a handprint, like I told you before, can become fossils. Very amazing. Bones. Of course, bones, we talked about that. Bones are very hard material, so they make a print in the mud and the sand around them, and that can become rock, right, after a long time. Teeth, of course, teeth are just another type of bone, right? The teeth in your mouth, it's just another type of bone, except we can see that bone, right? Hopefully, you cannot see the bones in your body except for your teeth. Impressions. Impressions are, a handprint or a footprint is a type of impression. But any type of impression, like we see here, what are those fossils? If you look at them, they look like leaves, don't they? They look like leaves from trees and bushes. But these can also make fossils because when the leaf falls down into mud or wet clay, right, it can make a print just like your hand, right? Especially if something comes on top of the leaf and pushes it down into the mud, well, that can make an impression, what we call an impression. Impression is another word for print. So impression is another word for print. And as we saw, prints, right? Handprints, footprints, prints are just pushing into soft material to make an outline of something. So those are things that can become fossils. So fossils are very interesting, aren't they? They tell us a lot about the earth a long time ago. Who lived there, what lived there, and how long ago. Okay, now it's time for the reading, and as usual, what I suggest you do is I'll read it out loud. You can read with me or read in your mind, but think about the pronunciation of the words, okay? And also look at the highlights for the key vocabulary that we're talking about in this lesson. Okay, are you ready? Let's begin. Fossils are the remains of animals or plants that lived a very long time ago. All the dinosaurs died out, but we can learn about them with their fossils. Sometimes a fossil is made when an animal dies in mud or sand. The animal is then buried by the mud or sand. The soft parts of the animal rot away. The hard parts like bones, teeth, or shells remain. Over a very long time, the hard parts turn into rock. The bones, teeth, or shells turn into rock. They are now fossils. Another type of fossil is made by making a print in mud. Plants or animals can make prints in mud. The mud dries out, it becomes hard, and the print remains. Over a very long time, the mud turns into rock. The rock is now a fossil. Very interesting. I wonder, do you have any fossils at home? Sometimes if you go out for a hike in the mountains or you go for a hike along the beach, you might find stones with prints of little animals in them. Next time you're taking a hike or going to the beach, look around. See if you can find any of these rocks. They're really cool, okay? Okay, well, let's do one more thing here. Let's take a look at the main idea for this passage, or how this passage is organized. How is the information in this reading organized? Okay, so how is the information in this reading passage organized? The reading skill is sequence. Now remember, before I told you about what happens first, second, third, when we talked about how fossils form. And basically this is the same idea, sequence. What happens first? What happens second? What happens third, right? Across a timeline. First this happens, then this happens, then this happens. That is a sequence. Okay, so let's go over this sequence and remember the words from the reading. You ready? Let's go ahead. An animal dies in beep or sand. It is then beep. Okay, what are the blanks? Okay, what are the beeps? Okay. An animal dies in sand, or what was the other thing we talked about? Sand is soft, right? You can make a print in sand, but remember the example I talked about? What material was that? We talked about mud, right? Mud. Mud is just kind of like wet dirt. Mud. There's a lot of water in mud, right? An animal dies in mud or sand. It is then, what happens to it, right? More material comes on top of it. Remember the vocabulary word that we learned is bury. Bury. But this is past tense. Quago, right? Past tense. So past tense of bury, right? We say bury, buried. We have to change the Y to an I and put ed to make past tense. So it is then buried. B-U-R-I-E-D. Remember, with verbs that end in Y, usually we change it to I and then put ed to make past tense. Okay, good. Next, the soft parts of the animal beep away. The hard parts remain. Remember, we talked about this. So the soft parts of the animal rot. They rot away. Rot. Now, rot is a verb, right? It rots. An adjective is rotten, R-O-T-T. You have to put an extra T when you make an adjective, rotten. So if you eat an apple, right, and you throw away the middle part, you throw it on the ground, you come back 1 week later, ugh, it's all black and brown and ants are crawling on it. And you wouldn't want to, ugh, yuck. It's rotten, okay? Also, living things will rot, living things that die will rot. But also, other things like food rots. If you go in your refrigerator and you look at the milk is really old, ooh, it smells bad. It is rotten, okay? So, rot, to rot. But the hard parts remain of an animal that is rotting. Now, these hard parts, like bones and teeth, and sometimes skin maybe, depending, shells, they turn into rock. The hard parts turn into rock. These rocks are now what? What is this whole unit about, right? This whole unit is about fossils, right? These rocks are now fossils. Okay? Because they turn into fossils. And fossils are cool. Like I said, they are evidence of life from a long, long time ago. Millions of years ago sometimes. Even billions of years ago are possible. In Australia, you can find some of the oldest rocks on Earth are found in Australia. And geologists have looked at these rocks to find out what was the very earliest type of life on Earth. So fossils are very important when we want to understand our history and the history of life on Earth. So very, very interesting part of science. Okay, well, thanks for studying with me. I hope you learned a lot in this lesson today. I was very interested and I was very happy to teach this to you because it's a very interesting and informative subject. Maybe one day you'll grow up and become a geologist and you'll search for fossils yourself. A very, very interesting career. Okay, well, thanks again. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned a lot. Take care. We'll see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.